Hi, friends. Uh, it's the beginning of another week. I've had a productive day. I did a bunch of laundry and got a job. Just one day's work. I applied to work I applied to work the election. So yeah, a little bit of supplementing of income. Hello, Alma. Good to see you again. So I'm going to be reading chapters 27 to 30 today. So an illustrious personage is going to enter the chat. We are off to Kent. With no greater events than these in the Longbourn family, and otherwise diversified by little beyond the walks to Meryton, sometimes dirty and sometimes cold, did January and February pass. March was to take Elizabeth to Hunsford. She had not at first thought very seriously of going thither, but Charlotte, she soon found, was depending on the plan, and she gradually learned to consider it herself with greater pleasure as well as greater certainty. Absence had increased her desire of seeing Charlotte again, and weakened her disgust of Mr. Collins. There was novelty in the scheme, and as with such a mother and such uncompanionable sisters, home could not be faultless. A little change was not unwelcome for its own sake. The journey would moreover give her a peep at Jane, and in short, as the time drew near, she would have been very sorry for any delay. Everything, however, went on smoothly, and was finally settled according to Charlotte's first sketch. The improvement of spending a night in London was added in time, and the plan was perfect as any plan could be. The only pain was in leaving her father, who would certainly miss her, and who, when it came to the point, so little liked her going that he told her to write to him and almost promised to answer her letter. The farewell between herself and Mr. Wickham was perfectly friendly, on his side even more. His present pursuit could not make him forget that Elizabeth had been the first to excite and to deserve his attention, the first to listen and to pity, the first to be admired, and in his manner of bidding her adieu, wishing her every enjoyment, reminded her of what she was to expect in Lady Catherine de Bourgh. And trusting their opinion of her, their opinion of everybody, would always coincide, there was a solicitude, an interest which she felt must attach her to him with most sincere regard, and she parted from him convinced that whether married or single, he must always be her model of the amiable and pleasing. Her fellow travellers the next day were not of a kind to make her think him less agreeable. Sir William Lucas and his daughter Maria, a good-humoured girl but as empty-headed as himself, and had nothing to say that could be worth hearing, and were listened to with about as much delight as the rattle of the chaise. Elizabeth loved absurdities, but she had known Sir William too long. He could tell her nothing new of the wonders of his presentation and knighthood, and his civilities were worn out like his information. It was a journey of only 24 miles, and they began it so early as to be in Gracechurch Street by noon. As they drove to Mr. Gardiner's door, Jane was at the drawing-room window watching their arrival. When they entered the passage, she was there to welcome them, and Elizabeth, looking earnestly in her face, was pleased to see it healthful and lovely as ever. On the stairs were a troop of little boys and girls whose eagerness for their cousin's appearance would not allow them to wait in the drawing-room, and whose shyness, as they had not seen her for a 12-month, prevented them from coming lower. All was joy and kindness. The day passed most pleasantly away, the morning in bustle and shopping, and the evening at one of the theatres. Elizabeth then contrived to sit by her aunt. Their first subject was her sister, and she was more grieved than astonished to hear, in reply to her minute inquiries, that though Jane always struggled to support her spirits, there were periods of dejection. It was reasonable, however, to hope that they would not continue long. Mrs. Gardiner gave her the particulars also of Miss Bingley's visit in Gracechurch Street, and repeated conversations occurring at different times between Jane and herself, which proved that the former had, from her heart, given up the acquaintance. Mrs. Gardiner then rallied her niece on Wickham's desertion, and complimented her on bearing it so well. "But, my dear Elizabeth," she added, "what sort of girl is Miss King? I should be sorry to think our friend mercenary." "Pray, my dear aunt, what is the difference in matrimony affairs between the mercenary and the prudent motive? Where does discretion end and avarice begin? Last Christmas you were afraid of his marrying me, because it would be imprudence, and now, because he is trying to get a girl with only £10,000, you will find out that he is mercenary. If you will only tell me what sort of girl Miss King is, I shall know what to think. She is a very good kind of girl, I believe. I know no harm of her. But he paid her not the smallest attention till her grandfather's death made her the mistress of this fortune. No, why should he? If it were not allowable for him to gain my affection because I had no money, what occasion could there be for him making love to a girl whom he did not care about, and who was equally poor? But there seems indelicacy in directing his attention towards her so soon after the event. A man in distressed circumstances has not for all those elegant decorums which other people may observe. If she does not object to it, why should we? Her not objecting does not justify him. It only shows her being deficient in something else, sense or feeling. Well, cried Elizabeth, have it as you choose. He shall be mercenary, and she shall be foolish. No, Lizzie, that is what I do not choose. Something fell down. No, Lizzie, that is what I do not choose. I should be sorry, you know, to think ill of a young man who has lived so long in Derbyshire. Oh, if that is all, I have a poor opinion of young men who live in Derbyshire, and their intimate friends who live in Hertfordshire are not much better. I am sick of them all. Thank heaven, I am going tomorrow where I should find a man who has not one agreeable quality, who has neither manner nor sense to recommend him. Stupid men are the only ones worth knowing, after all. Take care, Lizzie. That speech savors strongly of disappointment. Before they were separated by the conclusion of the play, she had the unexpected happiness of an invitation to accompany her uncle and aunt on a tour of pleasure which they proposed taking in the summer. We have not quite determined how far it shall carry us, said Mrs. Gardiner, but perhaps to the lakes. No scheme could have been more agreeable to Elizabeth, and her acceptance of the invitation was most readily and grateful. My dear, dear aunt, she rapturously cried, what a delight! What felicity! You give me fresh life and vigour. Adieu to disappointments and spleen. What are men to rocks and mountains? Oh, what hours of transport we shall spend! And when we do return, I shall not be like other travellers without being able to give one accurate idea of anything. We will know where we have gone. We will recollect what we have seen. Lakes and mountains and rivers shall not be jumbled together in our imagination, nor, when we attempt to describe any particular scene, will we begin quarrelling about its relative situation. Let our first effusions be less insupportable than any of the general quality of travellers. Chapter 28. Every object in the next day's journey was new and interesting to Elizabeth, and her spirits were in a state for enjoyment, for she had seen her sister looking so well as to banish all fear for her health, and the prospect of her northern tour was a constant source of delight. When they left the high road for the lane to Hunsford, every eye was in search of the parsonage, and every turning expected to bring it to view. The palings of Rosings Park was their boundary on one side. Elizabeth smiled at the recollection of all that she had heard of its inhabitants. At length the parsonage was discernible, the garden sloping to the road, the house standing in it, the green pales and the laurel hedge. Everything declared they were arriving. Mr. Collins and Charlotte appeared at the door, and the carriage stopped at a small gate, which led by a short gravel walk to the house, amidst the nods and smiles of the whole party. In a moment they were all out of the chaise, rejoicing at the sight of each other. Mrs. Collins welcomed her friend with the liveliest pleasure, and Elizabeth was more and more satisfied with the coming, when she found herself so affectionately received. She saw instantly that her cousin's manners were not altered by his marriage. His formal civility was just what it had been, and he detained her some minutes at the gate to hear and satisfy his inquiries after all her family. They were then, with no other delay than his pointing out the neatness of the entrance, taken into the house, and as soon as they were in the parlour, he welcomed them a second time, with ostentatious formality, to his humble abode, and punctually repeated all his wife's offers of refreshments. Elizabeth was prepared to see him in his glory, and she could not help fancying that in displaying the good proportions of the room, its aspect and its furniture, he addressed himself particularly to her, as if wishing to make her feel what she had lost in refusing him. But though everything seemed neat and comfortable, she was not able to gratify him by any sigh of repentance, and rather looked with wonder at her friend that she could have so cheerful an air with such a companion. When Mr. Collins said anything of which his wife might reasonably be ashamed, which was certainly not unseldom, she involuntarily turned her eyes on Charlotte. Once or twice she could discern a faint blush, but in general Charlotte wisely did not hear. After sitting long enough to admire every article of furniture in the room, from the sideboard to the fender, to give an account of their journey and of all that had happened in London, Mr. Collins invited them to take a stroll in the garden, which was large and well laid out, and to the cultivation of which he attended himself. To work in his gardens was one of his most respectable pleasures, and Elizabeth admired the command of countenance with which Charlotte talked of the healthfulness of the exercise, and owned she encouraged it as much as possible. Here, leading the way through every walk and cross-path, and scarcely allowing them an interval to utter the praises he asked for, every view was pointed out with a minuteness which left beauty entirely behind. He could number the fields in every direction, and could tell how many trees there were in the most distant clump. But of all the views which his garden, or which the country or the kingdom could boast, none were to be compared with the prospect of Rosings, afforded by an opening in the trees that bordered on the park nearly opposite the front of the house. It was a handsome modern building, well situated on rising ground. From his garden Mr. Collins would have led them round his 2 meadows, but the ladies, not having the shoes to encounter the remains of white frost, turned back, and while Sir William accompanied him, Charlotte took her sister and friend over the house, extremely well pleased, probably, to have the opportunity of showing it to them without her husband's help. It was rather small, but well built and convenient, and everything was fitted up and arranged with a neatness and consistency of which Elizabeth gave Charlotte all the credit. When Mr. Collins could be forgotten, there was really a great air of comfort throughout, and Charlotte's evident enjoyment of it, Elizabeth supposed he must be often forgotten. She had already learnt that Lady Catherine was still in the country. It was spoken of again while they were at dinner, when Mr. Collins, joining in, observed, "Yes, Miss Elizabeth, you will have the honour of seeing Lady Catherine de Bourgh on the ensuing Sunday at church. I need not say you will be delighted with her. She is all affability and condescension, and I doubt not you will be honoured with some proportion of her notice when the service is over. I have scarcely any hesitation in saying that she will include you and my sister Maria in every invitation which she honours us during your stay here. Her behaviour to my dear Charlotte is charming. We dine at Rosings twice every week, and are never allowed to walk home. Her ladyship's carriage is regularly ordered for us. I should say, one of her ladyship's carriages, for she has several." "Lady Catherine is a very respectable, sensible woman indeed," added Charlotte, "and a most attentive neighbour." "Very true, my dear. It is exactly what I say. She is the sort of woman one cannot regard with too much deference." The evening was spent chiefly in talking over Hertfordshire news and telling again what had already been written, and when it closed, Elizabeth, in the solitude of her chamber, had to meditate on Charlotte's degree of contentment, to understand her address in guiding, and in composure in bearing with her husband, and to acknowledge that it was all done very well. She had also to anticipate how her visit would pass, the quiet tenor of their usual employments, the vexatious interruptions of Mr. Collins, and the gaieties of their intercourse at Rosings. A lively imagination soon settled it all. About the middle of the next day, she was in her room getting ready for a walk, and a sudden noise below seemed to speak the whole house in confusion. After listening a moment, she heard somebody running upstairs in a violent hurry, and calling loudly above her. She opened the door and met Maria in the landing, who was breathless with agitation, and cried out, "Oh, my dear Elizabeth, pray make haste, come into the dining room, for there is such a sight to be seen. I will not tell you what it is. Make haste, and come down at this moment." Elizabeth had asked questions in vain. Maria would tell her nothing more, and down they ran into the dining room, which fronted the lane, and in quest of this wonder, it was two ladies stopping in a low phaeton at the garden gate. "And this is all?" cried Elizabeth. "I expected at least that the pigs were got into the garden. Here is nothing but Lady Catherine and her daughter." "La, my dear," said Maria, quite shocked at the mistake. "It is not Lady Catherine. That lady is Mrs. Jenkins, who lives with them. The other is Miss de Bourgh. Only look at her. She's quite a little creature. Who would have thought she could be so thin and so small? She's abominably rude to keep Charlotte out of doors all this wind. Why does she not come in?" "Oh, Charlotte said she hardly ever does. It is the greatest favour when Miss de Bourgh comes in." "I like her appearance," said Elizabeth, struck with other ideas. "She looks sickly and cross. Yes, she will do for him very well. She will make him a proper wife." Mr. Collins and Charlotte were both standing at the gate in conversation with the ladies, and Sir William, to Elizabeth's high diversion, was stationed in the doorway in earnest contemplation of the greatness before him, and constantly bowing whenever Mr. Bourgh looked his way. At length there was nothing more to be said. The ladies drove on, and the others returned into the house. Mr. Collins had no sooner saw the two girls than he began to congratulate them on their good fortune, which Charlotte explained by letting them know that the whole party was asked to dine at Rosings the next day. Chapter 29. Mr. Collins' triumph in consequence of this invitation was complete. The power of displaying the grandeur of his patroness to his wondering visitors, and letting them see her civility towards himself and his wife, was exactly what he had wished for. And that an opportunity of doing it should be given so soon was such an instance of Lady Catherine's condescension as he knew not how to admire enough. "I confess," said he, that I should not have been at all surprised by her ladyship asking us to Sunday to drink tea and spend an evening at Rosings. I rather expected from my knowledge of her affability that it would happen. But who could have foreseen such an attention as this? Who could have imagined that we would receive an invitation to dine there, an invitation, moreover, including the whole party, so immediately after your arrival?" I am less surprised at what happened," replied Sir William, "for the knowledge of what manners of the great really are, which my situation in life has allowed me to acquire. About the court, such instances of elegant breeding are not uncommon." Scarcely anything was talked of the whole day or the next morning but their visit to Rosings. Mr. Collins was carefully instructing them on what they were to expect, that the sight of such rooms, so many servants, and so splendid a dinner might not wholly overpower them. When the ladies were separating for their toilet, he said to Elizabeth, "Do not make yourself uneasy, my dear cousin, about your apparel. Lady Catherine is far from requiring that elegance of dress in us which becomes herself and her daughter. I would advise you to merely put on whatever of your clothes is superior to the rest, and there is no occasion for anything more. Lady Catherine would not think the worse of you for being simply dressed. She likes to have the distinction of rank preserved." When they were dressing, he came 2 or 3 times to their different doors to recommend their being quick, as Lady Catherine very much objected to being kept waiting for her dinner. Such formidable accounts of her ladyship and her manners of living quite frightened Maria Lucas, who had been little used to company, and she looked forward to her introduction at Rosings with as much apprehension as her father had done his presentation at St. James. As the weather was fine, they had a pleasant walk of about half a mile across the park. Every park has its beauty and its prospects, and Elizabeth saw much to be pleased with, though she could not be in such raptures as Mr. Collins expected the scene to inspire, and was but slightly affected by his enumeration of the windows of the front of the house, and his relation of what the glazing altogether had originally cost Sir Louis de Bourgh. When they ascended the steps to the hall, Maria's alarm was every moment increased, and even Sir William did not look perfectly calm. Elizabeth's courage did not fail her. She had heard nothing of Lady Catherine that spoke her awful from any extraordinary talents or miraculous virtue, and the mere stateliness of money and rank she thought she could witness without trepidation. From the entrance hall, of which Mr. Collins pointed out with a rapturous air the fine proportion and finished ornaments, they followed the servants through an antechamber to the room where Lady Catherine, her daughter, and Miss Jenkinson were sitting. Her ladyship, with great condescension, arose to receive them, and as Mrs. Collins had settled it with her husband that the office of introduction should be hers, it was performed in a proper manner, without any of the apologies and thanks which he would have thought necessary. In spite of having been at St. James, Sir William was completely awed by the grandeur surrounding him, and he had but just courage enough to make a very low bow, and take his seat without saying a word. And his daughter, frightened almost out of her senses, sat on the edge of her chair, not knowing which way to look. Elizabeth found herself quite equal to the scene, and could observe the three ladies before her composedly. Lady Catherine was a tall, large woman, with strongly marked features which might once have been handsome. Her air was not conciliating, nor was her manner of receiving them such as to make her visitors forget their inferior rank. She was not rendered formidable by silence, but whatever she said was spoken in so authoritative a tone as marked her self-importance, and brought Mr. Wickham's immediately to Elizabeth's mind. From the observance of the day altogether, she believed Lady Catherine to be exactly what he had presented. When, after examining the mother, in whose countenance and deportation she soon found some resemblance of Mr. Darcy, she turned her eyes on the daughter, who she could not have joined in Maria's astonishment at her being so thin and so small. There was neither in figure nor face any likeness between the ladies. Miss de Bourgh was pale and sickly. Her features, though not plain, were insignificant, and she spoke very little, except in a low voice, to Mrs. Jenkinson, whose appearance there was nothing remarkable, and who was entirely engaged in listening to what she said, and placing a screen in the proper direction before her eyes. After sitting a few minutes, they were all sent to one of the windows to admire the view, Mr. Collins attending them to point out its beauties, and Lady Catherine kindly informing them that it was much better worth looking at in the summer. The dinner was exceedingly handsome, and there were all the servants and articles of plates which Mr. Collins had promised, and as he had likewise foretold, he took his seat at the bottom of the table by her ladyship's desire, and looked as if he felt that life could furnish nothing greater. He carved and ate and praised with delighted alacrity, and every dish was commended, first by him and then by Sir William, who was now enough recovered to echo whatever his son-in-law said, in a manner which Elizabeth wondered Lady Catherine could bear. But Lady Catherine seemed gratified by their excessive admiration, and gave most gracious smiles, especially when the supper on the table proved a novelty to them. The party did not supply much conversation. Elizabeth was ready to speak whenever there was an opening, but she was seated between Charlotte and Miss de Bourgh, the former of whom was engaged in listening to Lady Catherine, and the latter said not a word to her all dinner-time. Mrs. Jenkinson was chiefly employed in watching how little Miss de Bourgh ate, and pressing her to try some other dish, and fearing she was indisposed. Maria thought speaking out of the question, and the gentlemen did nothing but eat and admire. When the ladies returned to the drawing-room, there was little to be done but hear Lady Catherine talk. which she did without any intermission till coffee came in, and delivering her opinion on every subject in so decisive a manner as to prove that she was not used to having her judgment controverted. She inquired into Charlotte's domestic concerns familiarly and minutely, and gave her a great deal of advice as to the management of them, and told her how everything ought to be regulated in so small a family as hers, and instructed her as to the care of her cows and her poultry. Elizabeth found that nothing was beneath the great lady's attention, which could furnish her with any occasion of dictating to others. In the interval of her discourse with Mrs. Collins, she addressed a variety of questions to Maria and Elizabeth, but especially to the latter, of whose connection she knew the least, and who, she observed to Mrs. Collins, was a very genteel, pretty sort of girl. She asked her at different times how many sisters she had, whether she was the older or younger than herself, whether any of them were likely to be married, whether they were handsome, where they had been educated, and what carriage her father kept, and what had been her mother's maiden name. Elizabeth felt all the impertinence of the questions, but answered them very composedly. Lady Catherine then observed, "Your father's estate is entailed on Mr. Collins, I think. For your sake," turning to Charlotte, "I am glad of it. But otherwise I see no occasion for entailing estates from the female line. It was not thought necessary in Sir Lewis de Bourgh's family. Do you play and sing, Miss Bennet?" "A little." "Oh, then sometimes or other we shall be happy to hear you. Our instrument is a capital one, probably superior to. You shall try it some day. Do your sisters play and sing?" "One of them does." "Why did you not all learn? You ought to have all learned. The Miss Webbs all play, and their father has not a good income as yours. Do you draw?" "Not at all." "What, none of you?" "Not one." "That is very strange. I suppose you have no opportunity. Your mother should have taken you to town every spring for the benefit of the masters." "My mother would have had no objection, but my father hates London." "Has your governess left you?" "We never had a governess." "No governess? How could that be possible? 5 daughters brought up at home without a governess? I never heard of such a thing. Your mother must have been quite a slave to your education." Elizabeth could hardly help smiling, and she assured her that had not been the case. "Then who taught you? Who attended to you? Without a governess you must have been neglected." "Compared with some families, I believe we were, but such of us as wished to learn never wanted the means. We were always encouraged to read, and we had all the masters that were necessary. Those who chose to be idle certainly might." "Aye, no doubt. But what a governess would prevent. And if I had known your mother, I should have been advised her most strenuously to engage one. I might say that nothing is to be done in education without steady and regular instruction, and nobody but a governess can give it. It was wonderful how many families I have been the means of supplying. Anyway, I am always glad to get a young person well placed out. 4 nieces of Mrs. Jenkinson are most delightfully situated through my means, and it was but the other day that I recommended another young person who had merely quite accidentally mentioned to me, and the family are quite delighted with her. Mrs. Collins, did I tell you of Lady Metcalfe's calling me yesterday to thank me? She finds Miss Pope a treasure. 'Lady Catherine,' said she, 'you have given me a treasure. Are any of your younger sisters out, Miss Bennet?' 'Yes, ma'am, all of them.' 'All? But all 5 out at once? Very odd. And you're only the second? The younger ones are out before the elder are married. Your younger sisters must be very young.' 'Yes, my youngest is not 16. Perhaps she is full young to be much in company, but really, ma'am, I think it would be very hard on younger sisters. They should not have their share of society and amusement, because the elder may not have had the means or inclination to marry early. The last born have as good a right to the pleasure of youth as the first, and to be kept back on such a motive, I think it would not be very likely to promote your sisterly affection or delicacy of mind.' 'Upon my word,' said her ladyship, 'you give your opinion of very decisively for so young a person. Pray, what age are you?' 'With 3 young sisters grown up,' replied Elizabeth, 'your ladyship can hardly expect me to own it.' Lady Catherine seemed quite astonished at not receiving a direct answer, and Elizabeth suspected herself to be the first creature who may have ever dared to trifle with so much dignified impertinence. "You cannot be more than 20, I'm sure, therefore there's no need to conceal your age." "I am not 21." When the gentlemen had joined them, and the tea was over, the card tables were placed. Lady Catherine, Sir William, and Mr. and Mrs. Collins sat down to quadrille, and Miss de Bourgh chose to play at casino. The two girls had the honour of assisting Mrs. Jenkinson to make up her party. Their table was superlatively stupid. Scarcely a syllable was uttered that did not relate to the game, except when Mrs. Jenkinson expressed her fears of Miss de Bourgh's being too hot or too cold, or having too much or too little light. A great deal more passed at the other table. Lady Catherine was, generally speaking, stating the mistakes of the three others, or relating some anecdote of herself. Mr. Collins was employed in agreeing to everything her ladyship said, thanking her for every fish he won, and apologizing if he thought he won too many. Sir William did not have much to say. He was storing his memory with anecdotes and noble names. When Lady Catherine and her daughter had played as long as they chose, the tables were broken up, the carriage was offered to Mrs. Collins, gratefully accepted, and immediately ordered. The party was then gathered round the fire to hear Lady Catherine determine what weather they were to have on the morrow. From these instructions they were summoned by the arrival of the coach, and with many speeches of thankfulness on Mr. Collins' side, and as many bows on Sir William's, they departed. As soon as they had driven from the door, Elizabeth was called on by her cousin to give her opinion of all they had seen at Rosings, which, for Charlotte's sake, she made more favourable than it really was. But her commendation, though costing her some trouble, could by no means satisfy Mr. Collins, and he was soon obliged to take her ladyship's praise into his own hands. Okay, that voice kind of hurt my throat. All right, chapter 30. Sir William stayed only a week in Hunsford, but his visit was long enough to convince him of his daughter's being most comfortably settled, and of her possessing such a husband and such a neighbour as were not often met with. While Sir William was with them, Mr. Collins devoted his mornings to driving him out in the gig and showing him the country, but when he went away, the whole family returned to their usual employments, and Elizabeth was thankful to find that they did not see more of her cousin by the alteration. For the chief of the time between breakfast and dinner was now passed by him entirely at work in the garden, or in reading and writing, and looking out of the window in his own book-room, which fronted the road. The room in which the ladies sat was backwards. Elizabeth at first had rather wondered that Charlotte should not prefer the dining parlour for common use. It was a better-sized room, and had a pleasanter aspect, but she soon saw that her friend had an excellent reason for what she did, for Mr. Collins would undoubtedly have been much less in his own apartments had they sat at one equally lively. And she gave Charlotte credit for the arrangement. From the drawing-room they could distinguish nothing in the lane, and it was indebted to Mr. Collins for the knowledge of what carriages went along, and how often Miss de Bourgh drove in by her phaeton, which he never failed coming to inform them of, though it happened almost every day. She was not unfrequently stopped at the parsonage, and had a few minutes' conversation with Charlotte, but was scarcely ever prevailed on to go out. Very few days passed in which Mr. Collins did not walk to Rosings, and not many in which his wife did not think it necessary that he go likewise, until Elizabeth recollected that there might be other families livings to be disposed of. She could not understand the sacrifice of so many hours. Now and then they were honoured with a call from her ladyship, and nothing escaped her observation that was passing in the room during those visits. She examined into their employments, looked at their work, and advised them to do it differently, found fault with the arrangements of the furniture, or detected the housemaid in negligence, and if she accepted any refreshment, seemed to do it only for the sake of finding out that Mrs. Collins' joint of meat were too large for her family. Elizabeth soon perceived that though this great lady was not in the commission of the peace of the county, she was a most active magistrate in her own parish, the minutest concerns of which were carried to her by Mr. Collins, and whenever any of the cottagers were disposed to be quarrelsome, discontented, or too poor, she sallied forth into the village to settle their differences, silence their complaints, and scold them into harmony and plenty. The entertainment of dining at Rosings was repeated about twice a week, and allowing for the loss of Sir William, and there being only one card table in the evening, every such entertainment was the counterpart of the first. Their other engagements were few, and as the style of living of the neighbourhood in general was beyond the Collinses' reach, this, however, was no evil to Elizabeth, and upon the whole she spent her time comfortably enough. There were half hours of pleasant conversation with Charlotte, and the weather was so fine for the time of year that she had often great enjoyment out of doors. Her favourite walk, where she frequently went while the others were calling on Lady Catherine, was along the open grove which edged the side of the park, where there was a nice sheltered path, which no one seemed to value but herself, and which she felt beyond the reach of Lady Catherine's curiosity. In this quiet way, the first fortnight of her visit soon passed away. Easter was approaching, and the weeks preceding it was to bring an addition of the family to the family at Rosings, which was in no small circle must be important. Elizabeth had heard soon after her arrival that Mr. Darcy was expected there in the course of a few weeks, and though there were not many of her acquaintance whom she did not prefer, his coming would furnish one thing comparatively new in their Rosings party, and she might be amused in seeing how hopeless Miss Bingley's design on him were by his behaviour to his cousin, for whom he was inevitably destined by Lady Catherine, who talked of his coming with the greatest satisfaction, and spoke of him in terms of the highest admiration, and seemed almost angry to find that he had already been frequently seen by Miss Lucas and herself. His arrival was soon known at the parsonage, for Mr. Collins was walking in the whole morning with a view of the lodges opening onto Hunsford Lane, in order to have the earliest assurances of it, and after making his bow as the carriage turned into the park, hurried home with great intelligence. On the following morning he hastened to Rosings to pay his respect. There were 2 nephews of Lady Catherine to require it, for Mr. Darcy had brought with him a Colonel Fitzwilliam, the younger son of his uncle Lord something, and to the great surprise of the party, when Mr. Collins returned, the gentleman accompanied him. Charlotte had seen them from her husband's room crossing the road, and immediately running into the other, told the girls what an honour they might be expecting, adding, "I may thank you, Eliza, for this piece of civility. Mr. Darcy would never have come so soon to wait upon me." Elizabeth had scarcely time to disclaim all right to the compliment before their approach was announced by the doorbell, and soon afterwards the 3 gentlemen entered the room. Colonel Fitzwilliam, who led the way, was about 30, not handsome, but in person and address most truly gentleman. Mr. Darcy looked just as he had used to look in Hertfordshire, paid his compliments with his usual reserve to Mrs. Collins, and whatever might be his feelings towards her friend, met her with every appearance of composure. Elizabeth merely curtsied to him without saying a word. Colonel Fitzwilliam entered into conversation directly with the readiness and ease of a well-bred man, and talked very pleasantly, but his cousin, after having addressed a slight observation on the house and gardens to Mrs. Collins, sat for some time without speaking to anybody. At length, however, his civility was so far awakened as to inquire of Elizabeth after the health of her family. She answered him in the usual way, and after a moment's pause added, "My eldest sister has been in town these 3 months. Have you never happened to see her there?" She was perfectly sensible that he never had, but she wished to see whether he would betray any consciousness of what had passed between the Bingleys and Jane, and she thought he looked a little confused as he answered that he had never been so fortunate as to meet Miss Bennet. The subject was pursued no further, and the gentleman soon after went away. There we are. We have met Lady de Burgh. And Mr. Darcy has arrived. Okay, so that's it for today. Next 3 chapters tomorrow. We may get to a very interesting scene. I'm not sure if that'll be in tomorrow or the next day. But we are getting on well with this book. Yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed my Lady Catherine voice, because that hurt my throat. Okay, well, take care, everyone, and I will see you tomorrow.